This is Julia with iCadenza, and I'm here with Joel Revzen, who is the Artistic Director and Principal Conductor of Arizona Opera. So hello, Joel.
Good morning, Julia.
So my first question for you is, what was your trajectory as far as your career goes? How did you end up where you are now?
Well, I grew up in Chicago, and after my first year of college at the University of Illinois, I realized I couldn't dabble in music. I had to really take it seriously. Started piano when I was 5.5 years old, and it's my instrument, my principal instrument. Studied cello for 3 years as well, and was privileged to have studied conducting with Jean Martineau, who was the music director of the Chicago Symphony. He was in between Fritz Reiner and Schulte, and Gerhard Schulte. After that, I went to Juilliard and got both my degrees in conducting at Juilliard. Following that, I started and ran the St. Louis Conservatory from 1972 to 84. In 1984, I was privileged. Pinka Zuckerman invited me to the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul to be his assistant with St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, where I did 22, 23 concerts a year, did my first 2 recordings of Haydn Creation and Haydn Seasons. I had become subsequently the artistic director of the Berkshire Opera up near Tanglewood in Massachusetts. Summer Opera Festival. Taught at the Aspen Music Festival from 82 to 91. And became artistic director of Arizona Opera in 2003. So.
Now, we were talking before we started this interview about the fact that you used to also be the general director of the Arizona Opera, but you decided to relinquish that to focus more on the musical side. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance being an administrator of a major arts organization and at the same time guest conducting all over the world, and you guest conduct at the Met and also the Mariinsky? How do you do that?
Well, I think it's establishing priorities. And the first priority for me was always making music was my principal occupation, my principal career. And I believe that what I do as a conductor is to sell my interpretive beliefs of what I think a composer intended to first my ensemble and then in turn to the audience.
As a conductor, how do you approach a piece when you first take a new score into your hands?
Okay, well, I spend sometimes hundreds of hours in a room by myself. I'm fortunate, I taught ear training for 15 years, so I can look at a score and really hear it in my head. But I also take it to the piano and I reduce it to the piano and really try to get an understanding of all the inner voices, try to get a large shape of the piece as well as individual smaller sections. But most of all, what I do in my study is to try to determine how to bring the piece to life off the page. What is the basic shape of what the composer intended? After that, obviously, we start the rehearsal process. And a conductor's job, many people think a conductor, their main job is the physicality of conducting because that's what they see. The main job of a conductor is to transmit the depth of their conviction of how a piece comes to life to their ensemble. You see any 10 great conductors and none of them look exactly alike. So the physical gestures can vary. You find people who have a very unorthodox style of conducting, and yet an orchestra follows them because they are so convicted of how the piece is shaped that the orchestra goes along, or singers or whatever go along with it.
It's so important to have a vision. You
have to have a vision. Well, you have to have a vision of what you really believe. You have to have a belief in what the composer intended, and we deal with, for the most part, genius. Mozart's operas, Verdi, Puccini, whatever. Symphonic repertoire, of course, Brahms, Mahler. These are people of incredible genius. And for me, it is such a privilege to reach up on a shelf and join sort of hands, minds, as best we can, with real genius. I mean, how many people in the world, Julia, really get a chance to do that? People that sit in an office, and yes, maybe they might admire their CEO, But how many of them really have a chance to get into the soul and mind of a genius? And that's our privilege, that's our honor. And I think we always have to be humble in the face of that union, you know, and it means doing the utmost to be prepared, you know. So that's my answer.
That's such a beautiful approach. What would you recommend to a young conductor who aspires to a career? What are some of the best things that you did early on?
Well, I would start with ear training, because if you cannot come to a first rehearsal hearing a piece in your head and being able to match it up with what comes back to you from the ensemble, you're a fraud. I say that very boldly and perhaps too boldly, but I cannot emphasize it strongly enough. If conductors are only about gesture, about physical gesture, and do not have really refined oral sensibilities, then they're faking it. You know, so I'd say ear training, ear training, ear training. The next, obviously, understanding performance practice of the period in which a composer wrote, because you need to hear and understand what a composer heard in their head when they wrote a piece. So I'd say, you know, historical understanding of performance practice is also very, very important, and stylistic understanding. Obviously, history of the time in which a composer wrote a piece. You know, you need to understand both the socioeconomic and political implications of the time in which Mozart wrote Le Nozze di Figaro. You know, they're not the same as they are today. You know, the social construct is not the same. So I think that's very important. But most of all, I think conductors need to develop a sense of conviction in their own interpretive beliefs, but it means hundreds of hours of score study.
Now, on the other end of things, I know that you've been really supportive of a lot of up-and-coming young opera singers. What would you recommend to young opera singers that are trying to make a career for themselves? What do you look for?
Well, I'm asked that question a lot. What do I look for in auditions? When I go into an audition, I don't have a particular sound in my head of what I want to hear replicated, because I think singers can come in all, you know, voices can come in all kinds of wonderful different colors. What I look for is a willingness to immediately engage me in what they believe is the essence of their character, represented through the beauty of their voice. And the beauty of their voice is subjective, you know. So I don't want to hear a generic, middle-of-the-road, safe presentation of an aria. I want to believe that they are that character for the 3 minutes that they're singing that aria. You know, both musically, interpretively, vocally.
I wanted to get your perspective on what it takes these days to establish a presence online and the importance of that. Do you use the internet to find artists, and how does that play into your everyday?
I certainly use the internet to see what artists have sung various roles, and then I can go further and see about the success of those presentations, those performances. But generally, I rely on hearing artists. I think the use of audio clips gives me an initial start in that process when I don't know an artist immediately, and I obviously can't go to New York or to Barcelona to hear them.
Or video clips.
Or a video clip. You know, I'm not as interested even in a video clip as I am in an audio clip. You know, I'm an oral artist. You know, I watch with my ears rather than listen with my eyes. I think so often today, casting is done by looking at an artist to see if they look like the role that they're supposedly going to sing. And for me, I want to hear the commitment to that character, you know, orally, through their voice. So I approach it more from that perspective, you know, as a conductor.
And I told you a little bit about what we do at iCadenza. What do you think about the idea of what we're doing and helping artists establish and strengthen their online presence and connect with fans and hiring agents through that?
I think it's the age of the future, without question. I think it's going to be a tool that no artist can do without. So I really wish you all the best in your future endeavors with this company, and I'm certain you will be successful.
Thank you so much. And going back to Arizona Opera, what's coming up this season and what can we look forward to?
We do 5 operas a season, 5 performances each in 2 cities, both Phoenix and Tucson. And we open with Pirates of Penzance, Gilbert and Sullivan, and then Carmen, Turandot, Otello, and Abduction from the Seraglio of Mozart. So it's a huge season. And then for me, I'm also doing a subscription week with the Phoenix Symphony. Which will be Verdi Overture to La Forza del Destino, Mahler Songs of a Wayfarer, Lieder einer Fahrendesgesellen, and Mendelssohn Third Symphony.
What a range of repertoire.
So it's a great year. For me, I get to make a lot of wonderful music.
That's fantastic. Well, we're so excited about this coming season, and thank you so much for your time and talking to us today.
Well, Julia, thank you for taking the time to interview.